was what was coming up, that how do you move ahead? How do you, in Bonn they also said that investing in natural infrastructure is very important as one of the 6 steps for a green economy, and therefore we need more investments in natural infrastructure. That's also what came out of the Bonn meeting. And therefore, if you look at water infrastructure, it could be the build. As I said, we are not saying there shouldn't be a build, but along with the build, the natural infrastructure, and then what goes along some of these lines. I think this is the current thinking that's happening post World Water Council, the World Water Forum in Marseille, and the work that Ambassador Park said, it started 2 or 3 years back. We've tried to again actually summarize where we are at today and how we need to now be moving ahead. And therefore, as you see, there are all these 4 angles to it. There's one is the economic, the environmental, the social, and then the other cross-cutting, which of course is very, very important. It's all about the governance and the governance framework, what happens, the incentives, market mechanisms. And therefore, as I said, I've already said this earlier, what is therefore the value of investing in natural infrastructure? And I think this is something that we have to now, I think, would be the next step when we go into our next 1 or 2 years of work, when we're looking at green growth and some of these aspects. How do we start really building up, as I said, the governance aspect on one side, but the investing into some of these processes on the other. This is something that we would finally, I think one of my final slides is going to be that please don't misunderstand that when we say investing in nature means investing in some watershed, investing in some pond, in a wetland or an aquifer. It's actually investing in people. Let's not forget that when we are talking of green growth and all the issues surrounding what we're talking today, water, sustainable development, green growth, we are actually talking of building capacities at the governance level and for people. If you miss this out, it's like somebody said the other day that it is not a gun that kills, it's people who kill. So therefore what I'm saying is that it's, again, nature does not pollute, it's people who pollute. So therefore, we cannot be looking at nature and coming and saying solve our problems or what it is. It's actually talking and changing attitude and mindset of people actually to be working and living with nature and investing. I think so this is something we cannot forget. It's the whole then issue of participation and good governance when we're talking of green growth. And so I'm going to stop with this slide now in the sense that with the Korean people who have been at Green Growth Institute, I think they will be talking much more on really the hardcore essence of the green growth theory and philosophy. I wanted to put this slide up is because yes, it's really commendable that in 2008 when Korea, the President of Korea initiated the whole green growth movement, and this slide I've taken is actually from what the publication which came out, which of the water and green growth. I just wanted to highlight one thing in this whole thing, and it is with no offense or with due humility that I want to point out one thing, that green growth is not for developing countries, please, because this is the fear that will happen if when we have new concepts and new things coming up and we want the world to accept some of these things which are very important. The moment you say that green growth is for developing countries, you're going to have a stone wall, and then again the whole issue coming up that, oh, it's not for the developed countries. We have to do something and we have to stop something, we have to stop our growth. I'm saying this not from coming from a developing country, but with a caution, and this is for the discussion I think later on also in the panel, that please let us refrain from saying that this is as I said, and I would like you to take back to my first slide, where it could be the fishermen from Bangladesh or the fishermen from Japan. Green growth is for both. Same way, when we promote the concept of green growth, let's not promote it only for the developing countries. I think I'll stop with this, and then thank you for the chance to talk with you all and share some of our views. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move swiftly on to our second speaker. Is Marcia Brewster, who is a senior consultant with Nautilus International Development Consulting, and was also one of the key authors for the Water and Green Growth report. So we managed to work together quite a lot in the last 6 months or 9 months or so. So as a senior consultant with Nautilus, Marcia has also most recently been working as one of the authors on the water, on managing as the managing editor of the Great Rivers Partnership project under the Nature Conservancy. And previously she worked as a senior officer in water resources for the United Nations Division on Sustainable Development, both in New York and Bangkok. So, Marcia, if you're ready to give your presentation.
Thank you very much, Callum and Ganesh, for your presentation. I must say that a lot of what Ganesh introduced in his presentation was very similar to what Callum and I have been working on with the Koreans, of course, on developing a framework for water and green growth. So I think we're more or less thinking in the same areas, but maybe there's more emphasis in the nature in IUCN on the natural infrastructure, although we definitely were discussing that. This project, Water and Green Growth, was financed by the Koreans in cooperation with the World Water Council, and the partners on Korea's side were the Ministry of Land, Transport and Maritime Affairs, K-Water, and the Presidential Commission on Green Growth. So the contents of the report we produced, the actual report we produced was about 180 pages, and it drew on a lot of background work that the Korean side had done on green growth. And what we did mainly is to look at a number of case studies, 26 case studies all over the world, and develop the theoretical concepts through the lens of the case studies, and what were the main lessons from the case studies and the common elements, and then draw a policy framework for the future. So the water and green growth strategic approach, you probably know about this. The green growth from the Korean government side was based on low energy and low carbon emissions growth, including energy self-sufficiency, climate change adaptation, and then on the economic side, new growth engines, and then on the social side, good quality of life. So we picked up on that for our water and green growth and looked at using, for the environmental side, protection and conservation of water resources, which is mainly about cleaning up the waterways and making people more resilient to climate change by protecting the watershed and so on. Water is an engine of growth, using urban waterways as an engine of growth, using protection of watersheds also, and involving people in the water industry. And then we also discussed the virtual water and the water footprint. Water for an improved quality of life. I think, number one, we have to ensure, and we're going to the developing countries here, that everyone has access to safe water supply and adequate sanitation to begin with, and that we clean up the urban waterways and waterfront living and make urban waterways an engine of growth. And a place for recreation that people love. And then, of course, getting people in the watershed involved in the protection of the watershed requires education and capacity development for both men and women. One of our case studies was from the Philippines, and in that watershed, over 60% of the people that were trained were women. These are our case studies, 26 case studies from all over the world, as you can see. There were 3 from Korea, but the other countries there were 1 or 2. But it was a good mix. It was a good mixture, and we divided the case studies into 6 different categories for what the main emphasis was and the main success factor for that case study, why it was a good example of water and green growth. So the first 2 categories were ecosystem recovery and watershed management. And ecosystem recovery, we found that the common factor that went in was using the river basin as the primary planning unit. So a lot of these started with a consensus along the river that it needed to be cleaned up, because it had just become, if you look at the picture, this is Istanbul, the Golden Horn in Istanbul. This was one of our case studies. The first picture is in 1985, when the Golden Horn had just become a sewer, and it was, and people couldn't even use it for navigation. And then the second picture is from the mid-2000s, when it's been totally cleaned up and it's an area for cultural and recreation and tourism, and it's just a beautiful place for people to visit. Collaboration among competing users. So we found that if the people in the city downstream, such as hydropower producers and municipal water supply, would cooperate better with the people in the watershed, obviously the outcome would be much better. And so the collaboration among the competing users was one of the keys to making these successful projects. Public-private financial support, there was a lot of there were a lot of different models of how these things got supported. So much of it was the public-private partnerships. Green infrastructure. This is similar to what Ganesh was discussing, and a lot of it was planting along water banks and protecting the water supply source. Active community participation was key. A couple of our examples came from Korea, and one that I found very interesting was from Lake Shiwa, where they had, the government had put a dike across like an inlet to the sea and made it a lake, but it became very polluted, and then the people protested. And when they were involved in the actual development of that lake in Shiwa, it became much better, and people really got onto the program. Watershed management, political leadership is key at both the top and the local levels. It's really important to balance costs and benefits among all the users, and we need expertise. So you can't just expect local municipalities to carry out these water projects without assistance from experts, from the ministries or from NGOs. Training and education for men and women, and economic opportunities, especially for the people in the watershed. Planning and finance were the second and third category, the third and fourth categories we looked at. There are some very good examples of watershed planning. The two we were looking at, one was from the Ebro River in Spain, and another one was from Brazil. In Brazil, they do all their water planning on the basis of the watershed and the river basin. And ecosystem protection was the main objective of the plan. So that was interesting. So after you meet basic human needs, then you make sure the ecosystem needs of the river basin are met. And they used a variety of instruments to achieve water management goals, including economic, regulatory, legal measures. They approached it from a holistic point of view, and they looked at all the tributaries and all the subbasins. Engage the stakeholders on both up and downstream, and have decent decision support and monitoring systems in place. The picture on the top is from Lake Naivasha, by the way, in Kenya. And the one on the bottom is a watershed planning meeting. I believe it's in Spain. So the financing and the public-private partnerships, a lot of this sort of comes from the original idea that came from New York City, the New York City Watershed Agreement, where the city of New York pays farmers and communities up in the watershed around the reservoirs not to pollute the reservoirs. And so they have to keep their animals so much of a distance from the reservoir. There cannot be any agricultural runoff, fertilizers, or pesticides into the reservoirs. So it's just a payment to the watershed people to protect the water supply, protect the water source. It's backed by government policy and institutions, and it gets commitments from both upstream and downstream suppliers and users of water. Again, the costs and benefits are shared, financing from multiple sources, and these are all flexible systems, and each one is different. Nature Conservancy has a big program on this, on payment for environmental services to upstream people who are protecting the water supply. Then we had technology and infrastructure as the last two categories. Water savings, recycling, and pollution control. There's a good example from Oregon where they're using wastewater treatment products, nutrients, as fertilizer to protect the, to revitalize some of the watershed areas. Demand management, just reducing the amount of water available during certain times for certain demands from industry and so on. Balance between large and small scale systems. This was in Gujarat. That top one is from Gujarat. They were using both large scale technology as well as small scale irrigation improvement techniques. Enhanced information and data systems. There's a good example from Australia on how to measure demand from different categories of users. And then again, nutrient recovery from waste products. That's a very good one from recycling. Infrastructure. Using water quality improvement as the catalyst for getting infrastructure in order. So this one in the bottom is from Santiago, Chile, and it's a big water treatment plant. But you know, that was the catalyst for doing a lot of different work in Santiago for cleaning up the waterways. Better use of existing waterways, use barge traffic, you know, build some tourist resorts or recreation facilities along urban waterways, and people love to go down to the river. So encourage people to go down to the river. Reconnect people with the river or the waterfront. And the importance to be able to adapt to unintended consequences of what you've done. So in certain circumstances, what the government imposed on the watershed or the people was not accepted, and it had to be changed. So again, flexibility, adaptability, and social mobilization of stakeholders. So working together with the Koreans and with some of the members of the Council, of the World Water Council, we put together this draft policy framework. And it is looking in the 3 pillars of sustainable development, of course, environment, economic, and social. So on the environmental side, protection and conservation of water resources, this comes number 1. Adopt river basin management plans using IWRM principles. And by the way, Callum mentioned that I'm working on the Great Rivers Partnership right now, and this is exactly what they're talking about. So I think that can move forward. Value ecosystem services to ensure that they are conserved. Again, payment for environmental services. Strengthen the capacity, the resilience of the people in the watershed to adapt to climate change and ensure environmental integrity of the ecosystem. By the way, this is a draft, and we would like certain countries to try to adapt some of these principles and then perhaps make changes in these suggestions. In the bottom, we have a picture of a watershed in Maine, in the US, Penobscot. And it's interesting because what they did is they decommissioned 2 dams. And they had 4 dams on 4 of the different tributaries. After they decommissioned 2 dams, they got a higher hydropower generation and a better fish habitat, you know, fish going back up the river. So you know, the fish population gained and the hydropower gained by decommissioning 2 dams. And they said, if we had known about this, about holistic approach 100 years ago, we never would have built those dams. Water is an engine of growth. So this is the economic side. How can you use water, cleaning up the waterway, as an engine for growth? Promote technology transfer and invest in innovative tools. Revitalize and better use urban waterways. That's what I was talking about in waterfront areas. I mean, look at how beautiful it is on the left. That's in Korea. On the right, barge traffic in Paris. So you can see that revitalizing the waterways can bring a lot of growth to the city. Adopt a package of economic instruments for recycling and reuse. Again, recycling nutrients as fertilizer or other products. Balance green and gray infrastructure among competing uses. This is again what Ganesh was talking about. let's use the natural infrastructure along with built infrastructure. And then on the social side, water for an improved quality of life. Empower people, especially women, to manage water resources. I've been talking about this as a UN person for years. Get women involved in water management. They're the ones that are upstream. They're the ones that want to protect the water source. Promote access to clean drinking water and sanitation. Again, this is one of the Millennium Development Goals, and it really makes a big difference to people if they have access to water and sanitation, and it makes a lot of difference to the water supply as well. Facilitate adoption of water and green growth policies through education and capacity building. That's not only for the people upstream and the people who are managing the water in their villages, but also at the policymaking level. People have to understand about how these policies can be introduced. You have to work together with them, consult with all the people in the watershed and in the basin to get the better policies. And build community resilience to cope with water-related disasters. And I think that's a lot of what the UN is doing.